What we've seen is that the focus on privatization has made a few companies very rich and has kept the poor without water. The poor, one of the symptoms of being poor is having no money. You can't pay the profits. And when the privates go into the developing countries, they insist on a return on investment of 20 to 25% per year because it's very risky, because they're dealing with a lot of poor people. We've got to stop the financial community from dictating the terms and conditions of how we operate. Because everything we're seeing from the donor community, from the World Bank, from the other financial institutions, is they want to see what they call bankable projects. Well, what do they mean by bankable? They have a different understanding of what efficiency means, of what equity means, of what the responsibility of the provider is. To them, the responsibility of the provider is to make sure they can return all the money they owe. For us, we have some other definitions of priorities, and we've got to look at taxation. So again, we need a better understanding of the role of taxation. The OECD is trying to give us some guidelines, but I don't think they're good enough. I think they're market-oriented. We've got to look at how do you, first of all, publish those who don't pay? How do you find out who's not paying their taxes? How do you, especially in developing countries where there's very little income tax, there's very little property tax, it's all value-added tax. How do you focus on taxation? It's a very boring subject. We've got to make that issue a campaign issue. It's got to be something we look at. The other thing we have to look at is procurement. Procurement rules today in the donor community say that if you want to assist another utility and use public donor money, you have to do a full competitive bidding. Well, the public utilities aren't in the business of doing full competitive bidding. They don't have a full marketing firm of 20 experts to help prepare the bidding contract. So you're losing all of your candidates for public-public partnerships. We've got to develop mechanisms that link the municipal providers and their reality with the donors, with the World Bank funds, but also, and probably most important, with local domestic bond mechanisms. Because the vast majority of the countries, I think there's only 20 countries that really can't afford it. All the others can. They just choose not to. The key for me is how do you bring academia closer to the movement so that the knowledge that the academics are able to generate, because they have the time and the space and the knowledge and the tools, how is that knowledge turned into practice? So for me, I think if we have some of them looking into procurement, that's going to be very important. Taxation, a very dry issue. How do you turn it into something people understand? People want to get behind. We've got the FTT. Can we have good proposals on how to use the financial transaction tax for quality public services? Another thing, I think we've got pretty good awareness, but we need more, is the fact that if you invest €1 in water, you get a payback of €7 in health, in economic spin-off, in growth. We've got to have more knowledge of this so that mayors, locally elected officials, but also citizens groups, campaigners, and trade unions can understand this. The fact is that in many of these developing countries, you will have massive competing demands. Healthcare, education, transport, justice, water, energy, all of these are important and high priority. The political will on water has got to rise, because without water you have none of the others. It is the elected officials who have to make those very tough decisions about what scarce public resources do. And clearly, in a country where there is not 100% coverage, I would not see why the top level bureaucrats would drive around in fancy cars or in fancy planes and have a very powerful army. I'm sorry. So that's a political issue.